Everyone's
Groovy.
invited to the party.
Everybody, the more the merrier. Come on, we need more voices. I dig it.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
their main thing is unity. But okay, let's go.
No, that's good. That's good. I didn't mean to shut you off. We're not in a rush. I took a while to send the link out, so we might even postpone a little bit here and go a little slower as we start everything. Um, we don't have to go into all of that. And we got the ethics. I think that's probably all we'll need. I'll open that up. Okay, now let's grab this, pull it over to this screen. All right, we'll give people a chance to come in, but we're gonna get started. So let's see if I were to share this. All right, as we give people just a second to file in, this is going to be the first class of ethics, which is one of the first year complementary classes, right? So in the first year, what we do is we read little essays and we get a feel for these general topics inside of philosophy. Ethics is one of the best subjects in philosophy, and so this can be our first class introducing it. Then year two, we do very differently. It's chronological, it's narrative based, it's a story, it's poetry, it repeats, and we have other things we do. And then, of course, year three is more like PhD level stuff, and there's a few alternatives there. We're going to be starting ethics today. This is Tuesday. We're going to continue our wrestling with Peterson. I think we'll be on class 14 or 15 of dissecting every word of Jordan Peterson in the context of Nietzsche and the Children of Nietzsche classes. But today, what we're going to be doing is looking at ethics. Unlike the other classes in the year one material, I'm kind of putting this one together myself. So we're not following an anthology that was put together by somebody else and utilizing their categories. Instead, it might evolve and change as we go because I'll learn things and we'll sort of shape it together a bit. There's a history of that in ethics, especially Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. He shaped his whole class with his students who were taking notes, and that's where the books came from.
Yep.
But these are the four basic things I want to cover. The first one is foundations. So we're going to have some conversations in ethics about foundations. That's a topic in philosophy of how do you ground your ethics. And there are four main principles, four main theories that people adhere to. One is divine command theory. It means God decides what's good, maybe by his character, by his nature. Of course, we know about the um, Euthyphroian dilemma. Is it good because God says so, or does God say so because it's good? Kind of a thing. But these are some people who have divine command theory ideas, and that's what we'll be reading through. Then we're going to look at a second foundation, which is duty. We'll look at Kantian deontology, Ross's deontological pluralism. We're going to look at a bunch of deontologists who say, look, the point isn't exactly that God dictates it, but the point is that you should figure out what your duty is and then you should do it. Then we're going to look at utilitarianism. All right, there's different types of utilitarianism. Obviously, we're going to be looking at Mill and some other utilitarians who say, how about the greatest good for the greatest number? And, why don't we just care about happiness and maximizing well-being or something like that? There's different types of utilitarianism. And then there's my favorite, but maybe the fuzziest of virtue is virtue ethics. Some ethical ideas is virtue ethics. And so we're going to look at what if we started with a characterological approach and said, be a good person versus figure out what the right things to do are. And if you are a good person, you will be inclined to do the right things. Maybe through habits, you can build the way of doing that. So we're going to look at a few other types of foundations. There's some newer theories about contracts and discourse and ego. So we'll check out those sort of as a fifth, sixth, and seventh kind of a thing. Then we're going to do in this course a whole bunch of ethical questions, which are going to be fun. So we're going to do like bio and tech and, okay, what if we were in charge of the laws of a state? What rules would we put on mental asylums for whether or not they can violate a person's liberty and lock them up? Right? Do they have to be a harm to others or a potential harm to others? That type of thing. So we'll ask ourselves tough ethical questions and we'll sort of just have really good group discussions and debate some fun contemporary ethical questions. We'll do some hypothetical ethical thought experiments. I mean, it's dumb in some ways, but it's also interesting. It's kind of fun to talk about a runaway trolley and what you would do, even though it has nothing to do with what you would really do. The third section we'll cover is metaethics. So just like in philosophy of religion, we're going to have some people saying, what is all this ethical talk? What does it mean? Does it really mean anything? I mean, maybe this is just semantics, or, what really exists, or how could we possibly know anything inside of ethics? So the meta-ethical discussion is going to say, I don't know if there are ethical facts. Maybe there are ethical votes. Maybe the emotivists would say something like, saying murder is always wrong really just amounts to saying boo murder, I disapprove of murder, but it doesn't actually refer to a statement that could be true or false. And so we'll sort of have defenses and attacks against the entire ethical discussion, because of course philosophers debate everything, including why are we here talking about this. And then the last section that we're going to do of the 4 sections is talking about the summum bonum, and I feel like Roger might like this the best, where we're going to talk about what is the greatest good, what is the greatest possible thing we could be orienting our lives towards, and what is the sum of all good, and what is good qua good, and some different approaches on that. So that is a very brief overview of what we will be discussing. Let me close out all of this, remove that, and add this to the stage. Okay, let's get into ethics. Ethics is, okay, one of the coolest things about ethics, and one of the reasons why I like it so much, is that there's a lot of philosophers nowadays in our post-Cartesian scientism world who feel like the whole point of a philosophy department is to argue very effectively that science is the correct way of thinking about things, and then stop talking. Basically, the philosophy department puts up these little signposts that point toward the STEM fields, and our job is done. And I think that's a lot of hooey. And one of the things that gives the lie to that idea is ethics. This is a discussion we have in philosophy. We've been doing it for a long time. We have a right to do it. We've made progress. This is a valuable, worthwhile discussion, and it has absolutely nothing to do with looking in a microscope for little units of goodness or something like that. So I love this conversation. So we use, as people, just as human beings, we use terms like ought. You ought to do this, or you shouldn't do that, or you were supposed to do that. I supposed you would have done it. We have duty, so expectations. And we use words like sinful and virtuous and vicious and wrong and right and good and evil and obligation. And when we use these terms, we're using moral terms or ethical terms or predicates. Statements which use them are called moral or ethical statements. We do this all the time. When two thinkers apply opposite terms to the same thing, we say that they're having a moral disagreement. So these are all conversations that we have. One of the things in a realm like ethics, which does have the quality of sort of needing to remind people that we're justified in having this conversation, is that often philosophers will mention, this is how we talk. And they'll start with, well, we talk this way. We think this way. So what do we mean when we think this way, and how can we sort it out? And it's sort of like, stop asking me if it's legitimate to talk about this. We do talk about this. So let's talk about it with clarity of thought. All right, moral statements seem qualitatively different from factual statements, right? A factual statement might be nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, but a moral statement would be something like the Spanish Inquisition was wrong, right? There's something qualitatively very different about, facts about things and statements that are ethical. They still sound like statements, which could be true or false. They seem like they have a truth value to them, right? It could be wrong. Oops, clicked a couple buttons. It could be inaccurate that the Spanish Inquisition was wrong. It could be true that the Spanish Inquisition was wrong, but it's not qualitatively exactly the same thing as saying the Spanish Inquisition lasted 150 years or something. So that's the first thing we'll notice. Like we said, we're going to do 4 things in this class. We're going to have a meta-ethical discussion. We're going to talk about foundations. We're going to debate ethical questions in biology and law and medicine and fun things like that. And we're going to discuss the summum bonum. So ethical questions. Those are questions like, is murder always wrong? What would be the best, the most moral, the least immoral, the most ethical, the least unethical, the most virtuous, or the least vicious course of action, given these circumstances? That would be an ethical question. Or should we legalize euthanasia is an ethical question, right? When is it okay to imprison someone? These are all ethical questions. Foundations is what it is asking the question, what is the primary principle, the standard, the starting point, the grounding, the method of attack for addressing ethical questions? What should we care about as the most important principle whenever we're asking questions? We're going to see it gets quite complicated because typically, especially with all four of the major branches of foundationalisms, there's a lot of agreement and there's a lot of overlap, and there's a way of, we really have to parse each thinker and say, okay, what's their most important principle? Because a person could say, I believe in a divine command theory. Okay, what do you mean? I mean that human beings were built to be happy, and their happiness is fulfilled in their obedience to God. Well, wait a minute. Are you a divine command theorist or are you a utilitarian? Because a utilitarian would say we need to maximize human flourishing or happiness, and you just think you have the key to doing that, which is obeying God, right? If it made you less happy and more miserable to obey God, but you still should do it, then you'd be a divine command theorist, right? So there's an awful lot of overlap, and there's going to be a lot of parsing that we're going to do to try to settle out these ideas. We want to know what grounds ethics if we're talking foundations. The things that are right and wrong. Oh, go ahead.
May I?
Please.
I think that the four foundations or the four types of ethics, divine command theory, duty ethics, utilitarian ethics, and virtue ethics, even if we grasp them quite well in an individual, still there will appear in his life moral dilemmas, even when interacting with the body politic. And even with the four, even still, things will be difficult to decide.
Yep.
So I'd
That's
say
right.
we need all the resources that we have to guide our moral choices and moral action. And even
Sweet.
these four pillars, I would say, and they, they, as you said, they overlap, they interact. I think they might synergize even, because if a person, like Aristotle says, is practicing good to become better, he might also become more competent to weigh things in a utilitarian way. He becomes a more competent person in utilitarian terms, but can be also at the same time considered a person more virtuous because he's accustomed and refined his morals through habit. So I think that there's a huge overlap and interrelation between them. I don't ascribe the people that just say, "Oh, utilitarian ethics all the way. This is the only thing," or virtue ethics. This is the thing. This is, we'll go forward with virtue ethics. So I think we need all of them.
I appreciate that. I'm just making a slide here to add to the slides that we're reading right now. So,
oh, if you want, I can keep on. I can keep on.
Go ahead. Keep pontificating for a quick moment. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we need people like Aristotle to give us virtue ethics, the Stoics as well. We need to look at people like the Stoics who say, choose a sage that you really like, or the Christians, just look at what Jesus did, Jesus as a character. Ask yourself, what would Jesus want of you? What would Jesus do? Or what would God want of you? Even though it's very fuzzy, it's very difficult, but at least you're trying to point towards summum bonum. I think one of the big things is actually trying to point towards summum bonum in a way, trying your best, even though we are miserable humans.
That's another good point, because each of these four foundationalists can have a different notion of the summum bonum as well. So it gets even more complicated. And there's a lot of ideas that they share in common, right? So people will take a cartoon version of Mill or a cartoon version of Kant, and they'll say it's all duty, it's all happiness. But then you read Mill and you're like, oh, he's got 5 chapters on how you could use habits to build into yourself an instinct to do the right thing. So we calculated what was the right thing, but just like Aristotle, we think building habits to become the sort of person inclined to do the right thing would also be a good thing. And so it gets very complicated. And then we can take each of those 4 and have a different summum bonum. And like you said a second ago, Roger, having a foundation worked out, right, in this subfield of ethics, you're saying, now wait a minute, hold on. We work out what the foundations are. We still have all of the ethical questions, right? I could be a divine command theorist and say murder is not always wrong. I could be a divine command theorist and say murder is always wrong. I still have to deal with all the questions. I have to apply those foundations. So what we'll do is we'll add a slide here called Rogerian pluralism, which says that my ethics is not foundationally grounded on one principle. Instead, it's supported by a web. There are strands that support it on 3 or 4 different anchor points, and maybe we need to use all of them. So that's the slide we just added there, and I like that idea. Let's keep that in mind as we go along. That's pretty groovy. So, but if we're going to do foundations, we're going to look for the primary principle, the thing that we say is going to matter to guide all of our of the way we work through things. But we still have to work through those things. And then we have something called meta ethics. And in meta ethics, we're doing the meta conversation, right? And so we're saying, what does it mean? Can we really know moral truths? I mean, it's like, I don't know, like it's not so easy. It's not just that it's not so easy. It's saying, I'm not sure this conversation really means anything, is really what a meta ethical conversation is about. And so we'll read essays arguing for and against that and looking at different camps there. Man, this heartburn has to go away. Hold on.
There's also another question, since you mentioned things being considered wrong or good categorically.
Yeah.
That's very, very difficult to do. No one can say with 100% certainty that thing A is absolutely wrong. End of discussion. It's very, very difficult.
It's tricky.
Yeah, just in the
It's
beginning
tricky.
of the Abrahamic literature, there's Genesis, don't eat the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil,
Sure.
lest you will die. The Buddhists tell at least the really teachers of Dharma, they teach people to not grab onto the extremes of goodness and badness. The Taoists as well don't go to the extremes. You will get the polar opposites really very fast. Also Socrates in many dialogues, in several I think, people would say, oh, thing A is good, and Socrates would start to ask questions, and they would gradually realize that they really need to have a nuanced conversation about things. They shouldn't just make pre-baked statements. Thing A is wrong, end of discussion. You
It's
can't
difficult, right? Yeah. So I mean, a philosopher is going to think a lot about something, but he might come to the ultimate conclusion: thing A is always wrong, right? But he might not. And one of the really cool conversations in ethics is: are there moral absolutes? And at first, you say, "Well, that can't be. We're always complicated in questioning things." But then there's a group of philosophers in the contemporary era here who say, "Yeah, there are. There obviously are. There transparently, nakedly, obviously are moral absolutes that are easy to get to." It's like, whoa, that's cool. You just entered the room. You say it's not so complicated. What do you mean? It's always immoral to torture innocent babies for fun. It's like, okay, hard to argue against that. It's always immoral to torture innocent babies for fun. Well, that's universally true. That's always true. I don't really have to debate, they say, for 10 hours to figure out if that's so. I could just put that on the shelf. Here's a moral absolute. Got it. I know they exist now because here's one. Now, maybe that doesn't mean that my foundation for all of ethics should be to find a bunch of them, or maybe it does, but at least I know there can be one. So argue these thinkers.
Yeah, they did a nice job of really hedging the situation. So it's the recipient of the harm is defenseless, highly sentient because he's a baby human being, and you will inflict huge amounts of pain gratuitously without any reasonable, good, justifiable reason. So yeah.
So the consequentialists would respond, what if an alien species came to Earth and said, we're going to destroy the entire planet and send all individuals into a million years of sentient conscious suffering unless you all agree to torture this one little baby for fun in front of us. And if you do that, we won't destroy the world. It's like, okay, fine. So the consequentialists want to deny that there's such a thing in that, or they could be able to, they could have grounding for it. The debates aren't over, but there are certainly a lot of ethicists who say, I think there are moral absolutes. I think it's always wrong to torture a baby for fun, even if the aliens come down and tell me I have to do it. I'd rather not do it. It's definitely wrong. So we'll look into all that. So let's look at foundations for a moment. We've got normative, which is we're just trying to figure out what rule we're supposed to live by. So the deontologists, they're the ones who care about duty, right? So you can have an agent-centered deontology like Kantianism. You could have a patient-centered deontology. You can have consequentialists, which include utilitarians and other pragmatists. There's single-principled consequentialists. There's divine command theorists. There's contractualists, there's discourse theorists, virtue ethicists, egoists. We're going to look at all of those when we do foundations. With metaethics, just real quickly to go through the summation quickly, there's semantics. So there's basically three branches: semantics, ontology, and epistemology. So in other words, we're going to say, okay, there's three ways to talking about what the good life is or how we should then live. The first one is, what do the words mean? There are cognitivists and non-cognitivists. The cognitivists would be moral realists, ethical subjectivists, error theorists. These are people who say the statements murder is wrong, statements like that mean something. But then there's non-cognitivists who say, and error theorists say, yeah, and they're always wrong. The statements murder is wrong is always itself wrong, but it means something. But then there are non-cognitivists like emotivists or quasi-realists or universal perspectivists, prescriptivists, who have different ways of saying, actually, the statement murder is wrong doesn't mean anything. That could be true or false. It just means boo murder. That's what the emotivists would say, for instance. And then you have centralists versus non-centralists. These are all different camps, and we're not going to do metaethics first. First, we're going to do foundations. So we'll just briefly run through. These are the different camps we're going to get familiar with as we go through this course. Then ontology is a branch of metaethics. So like what can be known, what does exist. There are universalists, relativists, and nihilists in that camp. And then there's epistemologists. How can we come to know? So there's inferentialists, both empiricists and rationalists. There's intuitionists, and there's skeptics. So we'll get used to each of these camps. We're not going to talk about them all right now. We'll just talk a little bit about it. There's a bunch of different types of modeling what the ultimate good is, the summum bonum. And so we'll look at least 4 of those. And we're going to spend some time doing ethical questions applied. So simple ones, hypothetical ones, really complicated contemporary ones. All right, back to foundations. Remember, we're looking for the primary principle, the standard starting point, and the method for attacking it. What's the singular principle that matters? Well, we had, as we said before, utility, duty, divinity, and character. Those are 4 ways of looking for the basic foundational principle by which we would say, okay, here's how we're going to go about figuring out what's right and what's wrong. Let's talk about them a little bit. Utility obviously has utilitarianism, pragmatism, consequentialism. These are just words that occur to me when I think of a category we might call utility. Obviously, it really applies to utilitarianism. But they're looking for consequences. They're trying to measure units of goodness and badness. And will your act give us the greatest good for the greatest number? There's a phrase that comes from a philosopher who's a utilitarian, right? And then duty is deontology. It's the idea of you have a duty. There's something that's right or wrong. Figure out what it is and do it. So we've got ideas like Kant's categorical imperative. We want to be adhered to logic. So we might say, these questions are very complicated. I don't really know for sure what's right. But I do know that if my action is illogical, it must be wrong. And so I can have like a categorical imperative. That's sort of where that comes from. Then there's divinity. That's something we could say, let's consider that lens. And Roger says, why don't we consider all of them all the time, which is a really good idea. But if we've got divinity, we might be thinking about God's will. We might think about submitting to God's will. We might think about relationship with the divine and becoming more godlike through communication and relationship with him so that we are the sort of thing that's good. And then again, these all bleed into each other a little bit. They're hard to, because that would be a little bit more like virtue ethics there. All right, so it's not like if you're a utilitarian or a deontologist or a virtue ethicist, you don't believe in God. It's just whether or not you think his will is what grounds ethics. That's the difference there. And then there's character, so virtue. It's characterological. You talk a lot about habit building. But we can have all sorts of different ends that we're aimed at, right? Philosophers, we're going to debate everything. We're going to debate what grounds ethics. We're going to debate what's right or wrong in specific questions. But we're also going to debate no matter which of these four we're using, what things should we be aiming at? Should we be trying to maximize pleasure, minimize pain? Are we looking for something more like flourishing or well-being? What about happiness? Should we just be worried about behaving properly or getting into heaven or satisfaction? Are we looking for a sense of what's that Greek word somebody taught me recently? It's merike. Should we have joy in our work? I think is how it's pronounced. What about pride or honor?
Called, I'm sorry to interrupt. It is called meraki.
Meraki. Awesome. I knew we had our Greek student here. I knew we were going to get that right by the time I had to just say it wrong to get there. Meraki. Meraki. Is that right? Meraki?
Yeah, meraki.
Meraki. Meraki. Okay. So should we be pleased to roll the stone up the hill every day? So let's move on. These are just my point of making this slide is to show that you could have a lot of different Venn diagrams and you could move combinatorically through all of these things and try to work out what one's at the bottom.
Zara, before we move on, could you please explain? Could you please explain what intellectual non-contradiction is?
Yeah, sure. So this is the basis for Kant's idea of the categorical imperative. So Kant is sort of stuck in Plato's cave, saying, I know I'm in Plato's cave. I know I can never get out and know the real truth. But so I'm not like Hume, who's pushing himself up against the wall, saying the shadows, that's all there are shadows. But instead, he's saying, okay, look, I know all I can see are the shadows. But even though that's the situation, maybe I can use logical non-contradiction rules to make sure that my behavior adheres to a maxim or a principle where it's at least the bare minimum of how I should have to behave in order to know that I'm adhering to whatever's out there that I don't really have access to that would tell me what's truly right or wrong. So it's basically just a philosopher's principle of behaving logically. And of course, Kant's categorical imperative is behave in a way where, as you're behaving in that way, you can will the maxim which motivates your behavior to be universalized. Okay, what does that mean? It means don't contradict yourself. It means don't do something that you wouldn't want others to do, or don't do something that the motivation for doing it, if everybody knew that that was your motivation, would preclude your ability to do it. So, for instance, Kantian might say, if you are in your house and your family is hidden in the floorboards and the Nazis come in looking for your family members and they say, we know you're hiding someone, we know you're hiding someone, and then you lie and say, no, there's no one here, it's just me. Why did you lie? You lied because the maxim which motivated your action was it's okay to lie if you're trying to save the life of someone from a Nazi. But the problem is you can't behave that way and at the same time will that maxim be universalized, because then the Nazis wouldn't believe you in the first place. So it's still wrong to lie, even in that situation, right? Kant is saying, I'm not sure what's right or wrong, but we can't be contradicting ourselves. And so we've got a universal principle that way. All right, so again, we're going to look at these four really briefly. This is just an introduction to the course. We're not getting into it right now, but we're going to look at foundationalism before we do anything else. So this is the intro course, and next time we come in, we'll look more closely at divine command theory. We're going to start with Occam of William of Occam. But right now, let's just briefly go over what we will be looking at in the foundationalism section of the 4 sections of ethics. And utilitarianism is the first one that we'll look at mostly, and inside of consequentialism. And we'll see that John Stuart Mill wrote a book called Utilitarianism, and that he gave us lots of phrases which we use today, like the lesser of two evils, or the greatest good for the greatest number, or a whole bunch of other ideas that really matter that are a part of his contribution. So we'll look at utilitarianism and we're going to say, ooh, we're going to calculate what the right thing to do is, because we're going to try to figure out ahead of time what the consequences are of this action and see which one gives us the greatest good. Then we're going to look at deontology as well, and we're going to start with divine command theory. But the second one we might briefly go over here is deontology. And so we have Immanuel Kant, the most famous deontologist, and we got his categorical imperative, which we just talked about, and a whole bunch of other ideas. Act that the principle of your action might safely be made a law for the whole world is another way of putting it. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end and never merely as a means. That's a great phrase, right? Treat people as an end in themselves and not a means for something else. So he gets to that through his duty analysis. Act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Another way of saying the same thing we said before. Duty is the necessity of acting from respect for the law. Okay. Two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe: the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me. That's really fun. We're going to like Kant. Kant is a lot of fun in ethics, at least, sort of. He's a pain in the butt in a lot of things, but we're going to look at divine command theory. So I hate reading Kant sometimes, but that's okay. We're going to look at divine command theory. We're actually going to start with William of Ockham next week at this time. But here we're just doing an introduction. An act is good or obligatory solely because God wills it, and God's will is not bound by any external standard of goodness. So he has an answer for the Euthyphroian dilemma, which we read, and there's videos of us reading it in the Plato course. Is something good because God says it's good, or does God say it's good because it's good? There's a lot of divine command theorists that we'll look at, but he's going to be the first. There's some other ideas we get from Will. I should have said from Will, not Mill. God can command that an act, which is now forbidden, be performed. And if he commands it, it becomes obligatory, right? So murder is always wrong, unless you're Abraham and God says, kill your son, at which point it is immoral not to kill your son. What? Holy shit. And this is what caused Kierkegaard to write a book called Fear and Trembling, because he was led to the conclusion that that's true. And he thought to himself, oh my God, I can't live up to that. I wouldn't be able to do it. I can't be a knight of faith. I'm full of fear and trembling, because it is true that if God said something, it would become good. And I just can't do it. So we'll look at some people who really wrestle with God through these ideas. The moral law is rooted in obedience to God's commands, which humans can know through reason and through revelation. Okay. No act is virtuous unless it is done for the sake of God, out of love for his will. Okay, now wait a minute. This is where we said all four of these are going to start bleeding into each other. An act is not virtuous unless it's done for the sake of God and love of his will. Okay, but are you a virtue ethicist then? Are you saying be the sort of person who loves God and his will? Or are you saying, even if you're not that sort of person, do the things that God commands and you've met your ethical requirements?
This reminds me of divine command theory and virtue ethics in action from the Eastern story, a bodhisattva that killed a murderer, a serial killer, to prevent him for killing even more people, which would taint his soul even more, and also saving the lives of the future people that he would kill. So this bodhisattva realized that it was the only way to separate this guy from the acts he was continuously performing, saving a bunch of people, and also kind of helping himself save him from himself. But yeah, so it's a bit like this. It's very tricky, but it seems like something that maybe we don't know, but maybe God would say, okay, do this thing.
It reminds me of Oscar Wilde's line in The Battle of Reading Gaol: for who can tell to what red hell his sightless soul may stray. Ooh. You don't want to end up in a place where the most merciful thing that can happen to you is death, but people can end up there. Okay, God is not constrained by human conception, justice, and goodness. His command defines what is just. Remember, when we're talking foundations, we're trying to debate what is at the grounding of figuring all this out. We can still care about habits. We can still care about virtue. We can still care about consequences. We could still care about God's will, but which of those is at the bottom of it all? And then we have divine command theory. This should say we have virtue ethics. With virtue ethics, we have Aristotle as the most famous virtue ethicist. And his approach is really interesting. He says, listen, slow down, everybody. We know what a good man is. Phil, he's a good man. He's really brave in battle and he doesn't run away and he does heroic things and everybody wants to be like him and everybody praises him and everybody admires him. That's the guy. That guy has courage. So courage is a virtue. Where is it? Look in the particulars. That guy, Phil, he's courageous. Let's go look at Phil and talk out what it is exactly that makes him courageous. And let's see if we can't figure out how to emulate that in ourselves and activate that part of ourselves or push ourselves towards the habits that would make us more like that. So be the sort of person who would do good things rather than whoever you are, do this, which is sort of more what the other three approaches are. Other ideas that we get from Aristotle, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. We are creatures of habit. Happiness is an activity of the soul in accordance with perfect virtue. I love it. Virtue is the mean between two extremes. Okay, so Nicomachean Ethics is a lot of fun, and one of the most famous ideas from it is he named it after his son, and his students put together notes from his classes and put this book together, Nicomachean Ethics. But it's really great, and the mean between two extremes is a famous idea, and one of the best examples is courage. And courage means martial courage, and courage is a virtue that exists somewhere in between cowardice and recklessness. And it's kind of a little closer to recklessness than cowardice, but it's in the middle there. Here's these two bad things, here's this thing, that's where you want to be. And so what Aristotle says is, let's build the habits to try to get there. Let's walk towards being courageous people and living in that realm. And if you don't know exactly where it is, maybe aim for recklessness and you'll probably get close, unless you're one of the few people who is inclined to be reckless. Then aim towards cowardice and you might pull yourself a little bit closer to the middle. So that's his idea. And again, it's his approach to just start by saying, well, let's look around. Who's the Phil? He's pretty courageous. Let's be like Phil. Let's talk about Phil and what makes him so great, and then we'll figure out how to be like that. All right, moral excellence comes about as a result of habit, whence also its name, ethike. Tell us how to pronounce it, please, Elena. Ethike. Ethike.
I'm sorry. Ηθική.
Ethike. How come the E and the E are both E? In Italiano, the E is the E and the A is the A. Why is it ethike?
It's not ethiki, it's ηθική.
Ethike.
Yeah.
Ethike. Okay, but that's still 3 E sounds. Oh, I'm so confused. I love it. Ethike. Okay, good. So it's in its name. Ethike is one that is formed by a slight variation from the word ethos or habit. Hey, that's nice to know. In poverty and other misfortunes of life, true friends are a sure refuge. Okay, nice. Okay, so that's the foundations. We're going to start with foundations in this course next week at this time. And we're going to start with divine command theory. And this is unlike the other courses I'm doing in year one. I'm kind of pulling in all of the essays myself. We don't have an anthology to buy for this one. But the next thing we might look at is metaethics and the summum bonum. And then we're going to look at ethical questions. So we could briefly just scroll through the metaethical things and what are these types of subjectivists. And you know what? We're not going to do that. We won't go through all the rest of the slides. We did enough introduction to let us know what the first section of the 4 sections are that we're going to do in this course. So this is class 1 of a year 1 course called Ethics, which is done in the same style as all of the year 1 course material, in the sense that we take little essays and snippets from different places and get an idea of the battlefield of ongoing and living philosophical debates. And this is ethics. So if we just quickly grab this, and grab this, and grab this, and this, and this. We will say, close out of that, and share this screen here. So we can quickly say, all right, we're getting back in the swing of things. Yesterday we did philosophy of religion. We picked it up and we started the first class of epistemology, which was really fun. If you didn't get a chance to listen to it, Dr. Tartaglia came in and we ended up having some really fun debates about epistemology to get us started. Today we just started ethics. In a few hours, we're going to continue with class 14 of Wrestling with Jordan Peterson in the Children of Nietzsche series. Then tomorrow we'll do meta, we'll continue Plato, and we're going to restart Zarathustra classes from scratch, which I'm super excited about. That's going to be a fun course on Friday. We're going to start at the beginning of Zarathustra, and boom, go right through it again. So I'm real excited about that. We'll be continuing philosophy of mind. Savad will be there, and we're going to do the 2 backbone courses for year 1 and years 1 and 2. This course right here is ethics, and we went through it in the video. This is all the stuff that we're going to try to cover and go through in this course. This course, ethics, makes up one of the 5 complementary courses that go along with the backbone course. We're doing all the rest of them. We're doing religion on Monday. We're doing mind on Friday. We're doing epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics. We're going to do all of the year 1 material right now, and we're doing a couple of year 2 stuff. We're doing Plato. We're going to do the backbone course. We're going to do Zarathustra. We're going to continue with wrestling with Jordan Peterson. So we're doing 4 of the years 2 and 3 courses. Dr. Tartaglia is showing up. Dr. Tartaglia has a class on Gödel. Dr. Tartaglia will eventually have a backbone course on Quine. And Dr. Tartaglia and I are both working on a course right now with some really cool graphics on constitutional interpretation methods and liberty in the United States and landmark cases. So we've already shown some of those graphics, but we can show them again later. Those are all going to be available soon. So if we zoom in here, we're doing all of this year 1 stuff and a little bit of year 2 and year 3. And this is it all zoomed out even bigger. So we've got a lot to cover, and I'm really excited to be doing it. And then hopefully we're going to be having some classes on Saturday and Sunday. One of the new developments is this. We have a Patreon now. We need 150 to 300 students to give us $20 a month. We should be able to do that. This content, there's already a lot of it created. There's going to be a lot more created. The Zarathustra stuff is super interesting, and we have 2,000 people on a different forum that I haven't talked to in 2 years who would read, 1,000 of them every hour would read every time I posted every day a whole text lecture on Zarathustra. So I'm going to start posting and letting them know that we're over here, but we have got to get people signed up to the Patreon because we've got to pay bills and we've got to be able to do a lot more classes. We have 2 other professors coming in to teach soon, 2 besides Dr. Tartaglia. One has an amazing amount of material put together for a literature course on romance novels. And I thought romance novels were just pulp fiction, nonsense, literotica garbage. But this author told me, no, that's not the case. Here's how you can get truth and meaning and goodness and out of really good romance. So she, who writes and ghostwrites and edits and does all of that in that field, is putting together a really awesome course on that. That will be available before you know it. And we have another professor coming who is doing the exact same thing. And I'm super excited about this because I've always neglected. I paid a lot of attention to magic realism, but I have not paid enough attention. I've always wanted to science fiction. And we have another professor who's going to be teaching a really awesome course that I can't wait to take on all of the meaningful reflections on life and truth and what it means to be human that you can get out of awesome science fiction. So those are both coming soon too. We're still doing the 1001 Nights class where we're reading some Salman Rushdie and we're going through books that are inspired by and relevant to the 1001 Nights and reading the 1001 Nights as well. So the literature and the philosophy are the 2 main things that are being built right now. We're going to end the live stream. We're going to go into an after conversation. This is just the intro class 1 for this year 1 course on ethics. And we'll pick up there again next week at the same time. Elena, it's so good to see you again. I cannot tell you how good it is to see you again. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we end the live stream?
Nope. Thank you, but nope.
Awesome. Is there anything specific about what we covered that you're most excited to get into in this ethics course?
The ontology and virtue ethics. Because for me, if you do not have virtue ethics, there's no ethics to talk about.
I agree. We're going to have to get somebody in here to disagree with us on that. I agree with you. I think that's correct. That's going to be really fun. How did you like epistemology yesterday? It was a really fun course, I think. Oh no, you weren't there for that. Philosophy of religion is what we did. He just talked
Yeah,
about it a lot.
I wasn't there and I didn't have the chance to watch the video, but I will probably tomorrow.
No, I meant to say philosophy of religion, but Plantinga was talking so much about epistemology, I got him confused. But yeah, the epistemology one is actually pretty fun too, and Tartaglia is awesome, and we had a really cool discussion. So, all right, we'll end the live stream. Roger, any last words?
No, I'm just really excited for all this content, all these lessons. So awesome.
It's going to be super fun. I can't wait to show you guys. Anybody who's watching, we have a map of all the subjects by which human beings have invented to achieve transcendence. Everything from javelin throwing to different subtypes of furniture building and carpentry to bioinformatics to Catholic theology, all mapped out. And you can just keep zooming in and zooming in and zooming in this fractal binary yin yang split to go from the humanities as a whole down to everything. And we have just finished subdividing romance literature. And we're going to do the same for science fiction. And we're going to just do the same for all the types of literature in there. So all of this is coming soon. It's going to be really exciting. Tell your friends. I will be putting up the link to Patreon. I should probably do that right now while there's still some time to talk about it. So Patreon is here. I'm going to put the link up in here, and I'll put it up on X. And as I verify that I am human. I've done this a few times today, X. Come on, baby. I sent out the links too many times today. Okay, so I'm going to publish it here, and I'll put it in my profile so that you can go and just sign up. $20 a month. You can take one course. You can take 100 courses. We've got 4 professors putting stuff together right now. This is going to be, look, the universities have killed themselves. I'll just say something real quickly. The universities are in the process of committing suicide right now. I said it 8 years ago. I said it to 3 specific universities, all of which are at least $3 million in debt and closing their doors and shutting down their departments now. I said, you won't be here in 5 years. And they're not. But that means that there's a big fat whale on the beach. And if we can do the same type of thing for almost no money, let's do it. Let's just live our lives caring about good classes. Let's care about good subjects. Let's care about the greatest conversations our species has ever had and recorded the greatest contributors to them. Let's sit and meditate on these things every single day. And let's make learning and teaching the same thing. And let's make it a lifelong project. Boom. Done. And on that note, rapidly, I'll say goodbye. Grab your cup, your mug, your glass, your tankard, your chalice, your stein, your canteen, jug, or flask, your vessel of any kind. Fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee. And in this case, I also really like coconut water. And join me now for the dopamine hit of the day. The thing that makes everything better. The highlight of human civilization, the simultaneous sip. Go. Oh, it's good stuff right there. God dang, you can feel the chills, baby.